started. Miss Taylor, could you go ahead and introduce the speaker for us?
Of course. All right, welcome everybody. We are so glad you are here. Today we have Lynn Braband here with the community. He is the Extension Area Educator with Cornell University. So basically he is a pest management genius. So he's going to be talking to us today about bees, wasps, and hornets. Oh my. Getting on into the late summer, we tend to encounter a lot of these, and he's going to give us some tips, tell us a little bit about them, tips for avoiding them, and how to manage those pests. So thank you, Lynn, for being here with us, and you can go ahead and get started.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. And your bar for defining a genius must be pretty low. But anyway, thank you. Specifically, I'm with the New York State Integrated Pest Management Program of Cornell University, which is a statewide extension program. And I have been asked to give a presentation on bees and wasps and hornets. We've done quite a bit of applied work within our program over the years. And this is the basic framework which I'll be keeping in mind as we go through this, with an emphasis on preventing interactions with the stinging insects, as we often refer to them, assessing or monitoring the situation, and then when needed, an emphasis on least risk but still effective control options. And Dr. Jody Gangloff-Kaufman, with our program a few years ago, wrote this book, Wasp and Bee Management, A Common Sense Approach, which is available through PALS, P-A-L-S Publishing, on the Cornell website. I think that I just checked it before I came on, and the price is $14. And within this book, Jody classifies bees and wasps into three categories depending upon the relative rate of being, or relative risk of being stung. And those with the highest risk are the paper nest building or social wasps. Moderate risks would be the social bees. And the lowest risk, not no risks, but lower in general than the others, are the solitary wasps and bees. And let's look at some major players in each of these groups. For the social wasps, the paper nest building wasps, probably more than any other in terms of frequency of stings are several species of yellow jackets. And the nest of a yellow jacket is quite distinctive. It varies where it can be found. It can be found rather open, as in these circumstances, attached to some substrate, hanging from a tree on the side of a building, in a like a barn attic, or an attic where they can have access to. They could be in the ground, they could be in a wall void, they can be in a mulch pile. But one common characteristic of all the yellow jackets is the nest. And the nest is these layers of egg cells. Each layer is referred to as a comb, spelled same as the device which you comb your hair with, and surrounded by a paper sheath, as shown in the cross section on the lower photograph. Then we also have another social wasp, the paper wasp, and these build a single comb, a single layer of egg cells, and without a paper sheath covering. And usually these are in, especially for our native species, underneath some sort of overhang. But the one which is pictured here is a non-native exotic, which has become very common, and it goes by a variety of names, like the Mediterranean paper wasp, the European paper wasp. The scientific name, which I tend to use, is Plistes dominulus. I often just call them dominulus. and they are more versatile in where they will put their nest. Still under some overhang, the basic nest structure of a single unsheathed comb is still the same, but you see instead of the nest being attached to the horizontal surface, in this case it's to a vertical surface. And another social wasp is the European hornet. Now, what the common name for another insect, which is the bald-faced hornet or the white-faced hornet, that is actually in the yellow jacket family. And the true hornets are old world species, Europe and Asia. And the European hornet is an introduced exotic, and it's a large insect. It's about 2 inches long, so it's pretty impressive. Last year there were a lot of online reports and newspaper items, etc., about Asian hornets, and which looks very similar. And so extension offices, at least here in New York State, were getting calls about people wondering if they had an Asian hornet, and almost invariably we were certain, they were really these European hornets. Again, these are considered true hornets from an etymological perspective, and they're a large insect. One interesting aspect of their behavior is they are often active at night and attracted to lights. So if somebody in a nice warm summer day is working in the garage and the garage door is open and the light's on, they may find this impressive large insect buzzing around them. The nest is very similar to a bald-faced hornet nest, which again, you remember I said is a yellow jacket, and that except since this is the larger insect, the colonies, the numbers of workers are fewer, and the egg cells are thus larger within the nest. And the nest is often in a semi-protected location, probably their natural environment of a hollow tree, but old barns or old outbuildings that have easy access are also a fairly common place where we find their nests. Then we, going from the social wasps to the social bees, and of course the best known of the bees is the honeybee, and this fuzzy, distinctive brown and yellow marked critter. This is the only of the bee and wasp group, and hornets for that matter, that our nests are truly perennial. In other words, that an individual nest will last from year to year. Now, German yellow jackets, which are an introduced species of yellow jacket, and often will nest in wall voids in large numbers. And if it isn't a wall void where it's protected, and especially down in the southern states, there have been German yellow jacket nests which survive through the winter. At least it has workers, but it's not really considered truly perennial as the hive or the nest as the honeybee is. So this is the only one which really typically lasts the nest more than a season. Of course, these are economically important, and there's been recent concerns about their population drops. Another social bee, several species of native bumblebees, and a fairly large, robust, fuzzy black and yellow critters, and these vary. There's several species. Some are of a concern in terms of conservation. One is federally listed as an endangered species, while one such as the eastern bumblebee is still quite common. And over the last few years, especially with the decline of honeybees, not that bumblebees were not important pollinators, but we've been focusing more and more attention on the importance of the bumblebees. These nest sites for bumblebees are low. They could be in a hole in the ground. They can be in a crack in a building foundation. Not uncommon in compost piles, in the built-up of litter in old hay fields, old fields, places like that. Kind of a loose matrix is where they like to make their nest. Now we go to the solitary bees and then the solitary wasps. An insect which is often confused with a bumblebee is a carpenter bee. a quick way to tell the difference, besides behaviorally, which I'll describe shortly, is that the abdomen is a lot less pubescent. So in other words, the carpenter bee has a shiny butt. And this is, again, with the social bees and social wasps, you usually have to actually grab a female in order to have a risk of being stung, or if you're barefoot, step on one. With the carpenter bees, there's a lot of concern because, especially in the spring, the males are defending their cavities, which they've been born into woods, and they're very assertive, but the males of all these species cannot sting. And so they get right up in your face, but they can't do anything about it, but they do make people nervous. And this is a common so-called ground bee in our area of upstate New York in the spring. And I use it to illustrate the numerous small species of solitary bees. Again, there's many species from several taxonomic families. These, again, are non-social bees, and so that they do not collectively build a hive or nest and defend that collectively with several generations of workers that hive or nest. And they often will concentrate in favor their burrows in the ground in favorable habitat, which is often has a lack of vegetation, like sandy soil. Okay. If you get a call in the spring of ground bees, people concerned about ground bees, they're usually referring to one of these guys or gals. And while if it's this time of year, late summer into the fall, if you get a call on ground bees, almost inevitably they're ground-dwelling yellow jackets. Then the solitary wasp, a couple examples of those are the cicada killer. And again, it's not very aggressive at all. You almost have to grab it or step on the female to get stung. The males will actively defend their burrow sites from other cicada killer males, but again, the males are unable to sting. The males are the ones which are most obvious to people, usually. And as you can see by the substrate here, it tends to build its their nest in substrates of the lack of vegetation, sandy soil. So one management tactic is just to, for both these and the solitary bees to describe later, is to increase the organic matter by whatever means of the area to reduce the habitat draw for these species. And then there are a variety of there are quite a few other solitary wasp species, such as several species of mud daubers too. Okay, in general, there'll be several techniques I will not be talking about, such as this one. Okay, I'm with an extension system, and our mantra is that we share research-based information. This is something you can find information on the website, and this is supposed to mimic a bald-faced hornet nest. And the idea behind it is that if another queen comes and sees this area, it thinks, oh, this is already occupied. I will not build a nest here. And again, no research, to my knowledge, or anybody I've encountered that can, from a research basis, substantiate these claims. So we will not be talking too much about those types of techniques, but types of things that will work. Building maintenance for any types of structural pests is very important. And it's a good idea. I recommend that going around a building, whether it's a school, whether it's a home, another type of public building, municipal center, etc. In the fall and spring are good times, because those are the times of the year when pests, for one reason often or another, are seeking to come into homes. And look for those gaps which have weathered open since you were last there, you overlooked, and think about how you can most appropriately close these gaps. Okay, one comment. This shot is a few years ago, and I have used, that's not me, but that's a technician with one of our county extension offices that is using expanding foam insulation. That's known as a foam gun, and I've used a lot of that. Those who do pest exclusion professionally are using less and less of this for a variety of reasons. So not that it's still a tool, but it's one which, again, because of its messiness and some other reasons, other products are starting to come more into play. So there'll be several shots here with the use of foam insulation. And again, in some of these places, that's still the best thing to use, or the easiest thing to use. So a gap like that would take a lot of sealant or caulk. Well, maybe not that one, but some gaps would. But there are various other types of filler materials too. So that's just in passing. Important thing again is to look for those holes and to secure them in a proactive fashion. You won't get everything, but just seeking to, you will get quite a few. Also, sanitation is always very important in terms of pest prevention. So in this shot, there are two attractants to yellow jackets, European hornets, and paper wasps. The left background, and you can see this is a dumpster area where is not very well maintained. In the left background, we have overflowing food dumpsters, and so that's a food attractant. While in the right foreground, we have a potential source of cellulose for these social wasps to build nests from, although there's plenty of cellulose in the background in the woods too. Okay, now we've done a variety of applied work, and the rest of my presentation will focus on this, dealing with the stinging insects, as we refer to them. The use of vacuums, proactive paper wasp management, yellow jacket nest removal and management, yellow jacket container trapping, some comments about low-risk species, especially recent work we've been doing with carpenter bees, and a couple of techniques which we tried but did not work out for us. So vacuuming, you know, this is a type of vacuum which pest control operators and of course many custodial departments already have a backpack. And I know of some school facilities staff that for even late season exposed paper wasp nests will vacuum them, and then depending upon the laws in the particular state, either then spray an insecticide inside the bag or otherwise dispose of the bag. In New York State, if they don't have a commercial applicator license, they would have to take it home and off the property to do it. But vacuuming is a tool. As you can see, this is being done in the late season, so the nest has a lot of workers, pretty large, and so this is bee suit work. Also, again, one of the most problematic are yellow jacket nests in wall voids. You often don't see these nests until they're well established, and you notice a line of workers coming and going from a small hole in the structure, holes which are often easy to overlook. One or two members of our program have used vacuum. So this is one case. Again, this is Jody Gangoff Coughlin, who wrote the little book I mentioned earlier, and that's a wall void nest. Now, the nest, of course, is just not at the opening. It's in the void around the corner usually. But she did, within an hour's time, vacuumed up 1,200 yellow jackets. And she felt what she didn't eliminate the nest, but she did feel that, again, she reduced the workers by at least 1,200, and just the numbers around. And she also thinks that she probably then reduced the longevity of the nest, how late it went into the season. Inspections. Going around early in the spring on those sides of the school. This is an elementary school, which we were doing some demonstration work on. And looking for, on those sides of the buildings where you really don't want those late season wasp nests, such as around the main entry doors, near playgrounds, this particular school wall was actually facing a playground. And starting in the spring, just go around and look for those startup nests. And the paper wasps are usually, you can find a lot of the paper wasp nests since they tend to be more exposed. And you'll find some of the yellow jackets startup nests. And you can use a for those nests, especially which are like paper wasp nests and Diminulis anyway, that introduced paper wasp, likes to build its nest under the drip edge above the gutter. And so one tactic where you don't have to put a ladder around the whole building looking for these nests is using the sky as a backdrop to see where individual wasps coming and going. And looks like they need to clean out their gutter from a lot of pine needles too. There's several other places you can look for these nests, especially again, Polistes diminulis, the introduced wasp, has quite a wide range of places it'll put its nest. So here's a hollow conduit as part of a fence where the end cap has come off, and there was a paper wasp nest in there. Here's a crossbeam piece, again hollow, pointed out a diminulis nest. Aluminum siding almost invariably have a lot of gaps, which again diminulis will make use of, and some of our natives will too. Okay, so you see that foam insulation was put after the wasps are cleared out. Playgrounds, especially old metal pipe playgrounds with a lot of openings in them. Not so much the newer ones like in the background, but like the swing set in the foreground are another place where often you'll find these nests. Again, these are pretty high stinging risk in these locations. And other locations like the bike rack, see there's a little bit they need to come back and do some cleanup work here where the sprongs, the cross pieces, the bike rack, there's several missing, and so wasps started to nest in those. So looking for these, and even proactively when you don't find nests in them, is to secure them. Okay, when you find these startup nests, especially the paper wasp nests, but even exposed yellow jacket nests, you can physically knock them down. I use this super soaker. The kids and the teachers got a kick out of that. Kids more than the teachers, because I was distracting the kids probably. But and it's just water. You know, schools or other municipalities usually have their own means, a little bit more powerful often for delivering water to a site, or you can just knock it down with a pole. One advantage I found with using a good stream of water is that if the founding queen is there and she's knocked down, then you can just step on her, because she'll be temporarily knocked down by the water. And so usually with these startup nests, usually just with one queen, or with the mini list, there may be one or two, probably her sisters with her too. But you're not dealing with a lot of multi-generations of workers. You see, I am not wearing a bee suit in doing this work. Okay. And we found in this demonstration project, working with several schools and in 3 different districts, that if, at least here in the Northeast, if we start in May, if a real warm spring in April, if we looked for and knocked down the paper wasp nests, particularly every 2 weeks from May through July. After July, it seemed like we didn't get really any new nest building, but we greatly reduced the numbers of those large multi-generational nests when school reopens in the fall. Their approach, of course, when you find these small nests, is just a quick aerosol in the morning too. But they can't just be physically knocked down. Okay, yellow jackets, again, nest in a wide variety of circumstances. And again, they often aren't noticed unless, such as that bald-faced hornet nest in the upper right, in a more exposed position. They often aren't noticed until there's a steady stream of workers late in the season going in or out. And wall void nests are particularly are hard to catch in this regard. So they're usually the most problematic, often among the most problematic situations is yellow jackets, German yellow jackets especially, but not limited to that, and in hollow voids of buildings, and they may be inaccessible. And the most practical control tool for these larger void nests is an insecticide dust. There's a variety of insecticide dusts out there. There are also some good plant essential oil dusts now on the market. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that plant essential oil dusts tend to have somewhat of a, not of a quick of a knockdown, and so you need to be very careful, especially on wall void nests, that it's a good idea to go inside the structure anyway and see on the inside of the wall if it looks like there might be a situation where you might drive wasp inside when you treat the nest. And again, that's probably a higher risk with the plant essential oil pesticides and with the pyrethroid and other insecticides. Once the activity has ceased, be sure to seal that opening, that little gap, so that another queen, another year doesn't build it there. And again, as Jody found out, vacuuming may buy you some time if needed. Another problematic situation, which again is not often seen until late in the season, when you have these large multi-generational groups of workers, are underground nests, near athletic fields or playgrounds. And so then a dust, aerosol, not as much, I don't think, but as a dust, especially as your best tool. And again, there are the plant essential insecticides. You don't have to worry about driving bees inside, or bees, wasps. Everybody calls them bees. I guess I just did. Another tactic, and even while you're treating them, is to rope off the area until you're done. But this is a strategy if it is a ground nest, or even a wall void nest in an area like a small little courtyard, which is hardly ever used, and you can rope it off or secure it off for the season until the nest naturally dries off. It's an area where you can control human access to it easily. That is a strategy. And then for a void nest, then late in the season, like up here in the north, well into November, and or early in the spring, in March, say, then secure that opening. Now the yellow jacket and ground nests are they don't, to my knowledge anyway, dig like a burrow, but they use like an old rodent burrow. They may use an area where there was a rotting tree stump, which is made kind of a soft matrix which they can dig into. So when removing that nest, either with after you've applied insecticide, and or when you just roped it off and let it die off naturally, you may try just to, if it's practical, just to eliminate that, or that collapse that burrow if that's the case, or dig up the old stump, things like that, to reduce that kind of loose matrix. We've done a fair amount of work with food-baited container traps for yellow jackets, and this has one approach to controlling yellow jackets is the use of these. And rather than a bait, not to confuse the bait with an insecticide, we could use the term lure, is what it really is. And it's well known that you can catch a large number of yellow jackets with these traps, but it's been always kind of debated whether you actually reduce the risk of being stung by the use of these traps. So we've done some experimental testing with this. And our major assumption with this little research was that if we reduce the number of yellow jackets, we'll reduce the risk of being stung. So we're assuming that. And our study design centered around the use of paired plots of traps on poles. So this schematically shows a pair of our plots. They're not this close to each other. They are like 80 to 100 yards apart, the members of each pair, and we had several pairs in each. For each year we did this, and each red dot represents a potential source, and I have a couple photos of you shortly, of a trap. The triplet of traps in the center of the plot represent what we are seeking to protect, like a concession stand, from the yellow jackets where the people are around, while the perimeter would be what we would be trapping. Now, what we did is that for each plot during each trial, we would trap the perimeter of one plot, but it's the other plot, its mate, we would not trap the perimeter. And these plots were 100 feet by 100 feet, and the trapping stations are 20-foot intervals around the proper perimeter. So this is a plot where in this particular trial we were trapping the perimeter, and you see we used a 10-foot 3/4 inch or 1/4 inch aluminum conduits driven into the ground, and the trap is attached to the top of these poles. And this is one side of one plot where we were trapping the perimeter of that particular plot in this trial. And this was is a plot which we were not trapping the perimeter, or only had traps in the center, as shown in the circle. And you see the poles around the perimeter on this particular trial are without traps. So we received a grant from the Pest Management Foundation in 2006, where we did this with 4 pairs of plots in several geographical locations, and we were primarily interested in where we were catching, the number of yellow jackets in the center, those triplets, those triplet of traps in the center. Would we catch fewer yellow jackets when we trap the perimeter compared when we're not trapping the perimeter? And we reduced the numbers by about 1/3, and and this is a student's t-test with p less than 0.05, 19 degrees of freedom. And so we didn't eliminate the number of yellow jackets when we trapped the perimeter, but we did reduce them. Well, we found something else interesting. In order to increase the number of replicates, we not only had, we replicated over space. In other words, I mentioned we had 4 pairs of plots represented by each of the color lines here at each of these different locations. But we replicated over time. And so we somewhat arbitrarily set our trial length to be 2 weeks. And then we would repeat at each location, do another trial where we would switch the perimeter traps. So if plot A in a pair, we trap the perimeter in the first trial, and in the second trial, we trap the perimeter of plot B. And so we did that just to increase the number of replicates. And what we found is that when we switched the location of most of the traps between trials, the number of total yellow jackets collectively dropped, and then gradually built over time. And this was consistent among all 4 locations. And so how we've been interpreting this is that kind of a who moved the cheese thing, that when we moved the specific location of most of the traps, it took a while for the yellow jackets to figure it out. And then we moved them again, at least in 2006, the numbers of that we trapped dropped off, and then gradually built again to the 2 week of the trial. So what this told us is that these traps are just not merely intercepting yellow jackets that would be tooling by anyway, but that the traps were attracting yellow jackets. Of course, just means is not enough. You need to have measures of variance. And so the initial analysis of the 2006 data was done with statistically with Excel, which is not considered to be as rigorous in terms of the statistical package, if you will, as some analysis. So we did a reanalysis of the 2006 with the the free access statistical website R, and although the same trends were found in all in terms of fewer captures when we within the center plots when we trapped the perimeter of the plots, under R, that reanalysis was not significant. The individuals who did the analysis for us did suggest that we might want to compare ratios of captures in the center to peripheral traps, and maybe that would give us some more additional information. We have yet to do that, but that's something we need to follow through on. Also, we've repeated the research in the years 2014, 2015, and 2016, and we found not as consistent as it was in 2006. There was more variability. So we looked at, we did an analysis of landscape and weather features for all the plot locations for all the years we did this, including the 2006. And not a clear picture in terms of the relationship between landscape and weather features to date anyway. But our summary to date, and my colleague, Dr. Matt Fry, this is his statement, is that the complex landscape and weather factors influence yellow jacket activity, but may not be predictive of yellow jacket activity. So conclusions to date, believe that the best use of these traps is there's already exists a strong attractant, such as concession stands, or something else, which will be a food attractant for the yellow jackets. I do not tend to recommend them if there's no food attractant, such as maybe the case in a well-maintained school playground that doesn't have a lot of overflowing trash or something like that, because you may actually be increasing the risk. In other words, the traps may actually be attracting yellow jackets that wouldn't be attracted. The distance from the, quote, protected area, like the concession stand, may be important. Some practitioners have put them right on the concession stands. Probably more commonly, you know, we've done what we sought to mimic with our plots in our little research trial, was to circle the protected area, or like the concession stand. Festivals, we worked with several festivals, and recommend that, you know, they start trapping about 1 week before. The traps need to be regularly serviced, and then keep trapping through the festival. And the traps need to be regularly serviced, preferably daily. When yellow jacket sting risk is highest is, of course, is when they're after sweets. In terms of a bait, there are commercial baits, but, you know, any cheap liquid is good. You know, the liquid attracts them, and what they do is they drown in the liquid. That's what kills them. Vaseline around the inside of the rim of the bait jar may decrease them getting in the trap and leaving. We suggest the traps be about 6 feet in height, and they're best located, at least in our experience, in sunny sites. You know, use of the traps is not a substitute for lack of sanitation. So you know, you need to reduce alternative food sources like caps on beverages, things like that. We've also done a little work with adding surfactant to the water. In other words, dish soap. Again, Dr. Matt Fry, this is his work, and he has this is his study designed and showing that a pear trap in an apple orchard, the trap on the left contains a surfactant and has a lot more yellow jackets than the one which does not. And the surfactant, we believe, reduces the amount which escape, probably. And so Matt says this is still a preliminary analysis. He needs to run some better statistics on it yet, but it does appear that there's in fact an increased the catch. And he also found that he needed to use a floral scented soap. That another soap he tried may actually have been a repellent. Okay, switching gears a little bit to talk a little bit about carpenter bees. And so carpenter bees are a unique situation from this group of insects that we're looking at, and that we're not really concerned about stinging risks, but we're concerned about structural damage associated with them. So a couple of years ago, several members of our program were doing some field work on, there are these carpenter bee traps that are available, and you can make your own, you can buy them. And so our program sought to address, will these traps catch carpenter bees? And our work in 2006, yes, they will catch both males and females, but not all the carpenter bees at a particular site are captured, and they also catch other insects. And so one possible way to reduce that non-target catch is to remove the traps when the carpenter bee activity ceases. So with that in mind, the research was expanded, and it was seeking, the most recent research was, can carpenter bee activity in terms of burrowing in the wood be reduced by a combination of trapping the bees and filling the holes? And we used a variety of, so Matt Fry, Jody Gangoff-Kaufman, and another member of our program, Julian Lant member, the individuals involved with this, used a variety of materials for filling the holes. They did find that the carpenter bees are not attempting to remove the sealant, but the females, at least anecdotally, appear to become more aggressive. Less resources, and so they're more aggressive, not with humans necessarily, but with each other. When there's less resources, i.e. holes, for them, which may make them easier to trap, possibly. So this work was done in 9 sites, distributed in 2 counties. 389 openings were closed using 8 different products. Those are listed above. And what needs to be done yet is to revisit the sites and see if there has been any damage. So this is ongoing work. Now, often the most significant damage comes not from the bees themselves. If there's enough, it can, but from woodpeckers, which are going after the bees. So I'm going to break my little rule that I mentioned at the beginning and talking about something which does, to my knowledge, not to date anyway, have a strong research base, because I'm not aware of any research base on this product, but in the left picture. But this is a product made by the company Bird Barrier. It's called Optical Gel. And it comes in these handy little canisters, which can be attached on a variety of surfaces, including a vertical surface like this. And it's claimed that to the bird's eyesight, this is a visual repellent, is the claim. And to the bird's eyesight, it even looks like fire. So again, I don't know of any research, independent research, which backs these claims up. But last year on the Facebook groups of wildlife control operators, anecdotally, they felt that they had a lot of success with these. So I did want to mention this as a possible tool, and it would be interesting to have some research done on it. Okay. Other solitary wasps and bees, cicada killers, possible approaches. I took this photo. This was on a central campus of a local college near where I am. So admittedly, this is not an elementary school with children. A college, we're dealing with at least theoretical adults. And there were a lot of yellow jackets. Again, the most obvious ones were like this male who were out, which can't sting, but they were defending from, at least from other cicada killers. If I say yellow jackets, cicada killers, the burrow site. But the head groundskeeper, what he did, which I thought was a good tactic and it worked in his circumstance, was he essentially did a PR campaign. He put out a little news release, an intra-campus news release explaining, you see it's a very sandy soil where it's located, and something about the biology of the cicada killers, the low risk in terms of getting stung involved, and although he didn't say this, essentially was, kind of gave the impression, enjoy the show. So it was a good, that PR approach in this circumstance worked for that individual at a college campus. And similar a lot in terms of education with ground bees. Now, again, if you have young children going, and playgrounds, since they're often quite sandy or have a lack of vegetation in a way, it's not uncommon for ground bees in the spring to build several burrows because the habitat's good for them. And so if a kid's coming around there, that can be a pretty risky situation and would need to be addressed. That's one of my granddaughters. She's 8 now. She was 5, and there was some excavation done on a neighbor's house, and ground bees had made use of the lack of vegetation. And you can tell by the look in her face that when I asked her to stand there as my model, that she trusted Grandpa, but she wasn't certain how far. But again, one long-term management tactic here is to increase the vegetative cover on these sites, if at all possible, to reduce the habitat if they're not desired. Okay, a couple things which we tried but didn't work out for us. This one we didn't, was just was done a little bit anecdotally, and since it didn't work out for us, we didn't pursue it in a more systematic research fashion. But it's the concept that if you have a ground yellow jacket nest, if you place a transparent glass container over the entrance, that it fools the yellow jackets. They will try to come out, and they don't know that they can't get out, and they won't think about digging another entrance to the nest, and they'll starve. So we tried that in a couple places, and what we used were like mason jars, as you see right here. And so that was over the original hole, and they stuck this stick in the new hole the yellow jackets made. So I gave this presentation several years ago at a North Carolina pest control meeting, and a practitioner raised a hand, and he said, the mistake that was made is that you didn't use a round bowl. And since then, I've had an entomologist felt that was the mistake we made. So again, I don't know of any research to back that up, but I do want to mention that that interaction. Something which we did approach more systematically was that down in the Florida Keys, there is a kind of a subculture where people paint the undersides of their porches sky blue, thinking to trick paper wasps not to nest there. I guess, they think it's sky, I guess is the way the thinking's going. Well, we actually had a utility company approach us and wondering if they provided the paint, if we would provide the labor and test this out, because they were interested in maybe using this in their utility boxes where, they would have workmen come and open to service the utility box, and there'd be a paper wasp nest in there. And they wondered if they did this, would that reduce that? So we did this. We approached it in a couple manners. Some places in eaves, we painted, some sections of eaves and left other sections of eaves unpainted. And then more frequently, though, we took these plastic planters, which one of our extension people says when she's using these for a garden, she often has paper wasps build nests in them. And so some of them we painted the half the inside blue, and some we left all black. And then we arranged them in pairs in a variety of ways. Here's one you see alternating choices, if you will, on the side of a building. And here we have choices mounted on a pole going around a building. And so we possibly did get some reduction, but not enough to recommend it. So I've kind of shot my wad. Unless there's some questions or comments.
Yes, we actually have a question from Ryan. Let me pull it up. He said that they, with schools and residential properties, that they have usually can get them free of paper wasp and yellow jackets, and the real problem they have is coming in contact with these pests when they're foraging and other activities. So there's still some risk during school and that kind of thing. And so some of the ways they try to mitigate that is sealing up the nesting sites, monitoring and inspecting the property regularly, eliminating attractants, eliminating trash receptacles, standing water, food, flowering plants, etc. But he wondered if there's any other ideas that you might have that would be useful.
Again, especially if there's places like, I'm thinking of schools, like concession stands at football, soccer game. If it's an issue there, they may want to consider use of the traps, possibly with a surfactant. Talk with your local regulatory agents about how they would view the adding surfactant to that. Here in New York State, as a surfactant, in other words, it's the insects encounter when they go in to the trap, they consider that legitimate. And I see there's another question on there, is if I added soap to my super soaker, if that would help. Yes, it would, but here in New York State anyway, that would be considered, since I'm directly applying that to the nest, as the use of an unregistered pesticide. But that's New York State. But I'm not here in New York State in terms of adding it to the trap to reduce the number which are getting out of the trap. They have said that's okay for us to do that. So, if there's something, consider use of the traps, at least the possibility. Then keep in mind that they will attract yellow jackets, so you want to be selective about where you use those traps.
Okay, thank you. I think the only other question we had, somebody said, asked earlier about weighing the benefits of them pollinating versus them being stinging pests.
Okay. Wasps in general are predators and scavengers. So the pollinators are the bees. So the so-called ground bees, bumblebees, honeybees, they are important pollinators. And that's not saying that yellow jackets and paper wasps will not do some pollination, but again, they're more predators than scavengers. But when it comes to, that's why I always encourage people, unless it's a situation like a playground or something like that with ground bees, to when they see that, the first thing they want to do is go for the raid, so to speak.
Yes, spraying is usually always the first thing you want to go to. Let's see. We wondered about moving a good pollinator, bumblebee nest recommendations. I'm not sure what that question is about. Mary Lee, I'm not sure what you mean by your question. She has not responded. Anybody else have any other questions?
Has anybody tried the glass bowl over a yellow jacket nest trick?
Kurt wanted us to mention how do you ID carpenter bees? And He said the way you identify them is the little tool belt on their abdomen.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Or I've also said, as I mentioned, a shiny butt. And again, behaviorally, behaviorally in the spring, those males are defending those burrow sites, and they're very obvious.
Ryan asked, do you think that fipronil will ever be labeled for use in meat-based baits for yellow jacket control?
Well, there's work right now going on in California. Again, it's just a research, but their work, especially with I believe fipronil, I may be wrong in that, but I don't think so. But was actually they're working with an attractant for a bait, not a lure, and so that's still at the research stage.
Okay, I think that is all the questions we have. If y'all wouldn't mind filling out that poll, the survey on there, we've got some of the results up. And thank you so much, Lynn. That was wonderful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys. We'll see y'all. Hopefully, we'll see y'all next month. Come back on September 7th when we have winterizing your home to keep out the pests, because September is the month those temperatures start to drop and pests start coming in. Thank you again. That was a wonderful webinar. Y'all have a great weekend.